welcome back to another episode of Current Density with Jayden, the podcast where we explore global issue with the fresh perspectives and deep insights. I'm your host, Charlie, and today we're diving into a topic that affects every one of us, whether we realize it or not: free trade. Joining me is my co-host, Jayden. How are you doing today, Jayden?
Yeah, I'm doing great. And I'm really excited to discuss this topic. Free trade shapes so many aspects of society, from the products we buy to the employment market. I think it will be a fascinating conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack, from boosting consumer choices to fostering economic growth. Free trade offers countless benefits, but it also comes with challenges like its effects on domestic job and labor standards. So together, we'll unpack what free trade really means and how it influences nations, businesses, and individuals, and the ethical and environmental concerns tied to it. So grab a coffee, sit back, and join us as we unravel complexities of free trade. Let's get started. Let's start with the basics, Jayden. For those who might not be familiar, what exactly free trade and why is it so important in today's global economy?
Yeah, so free trade is basically the unrestricted exchange of goods and services between countries without tariffs, quotas, or other barriers. It enables nations to specialize in producing goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage, leading to increased efficiency and economic growth. In today's interconnected global economy, free trade fosters innovation, lowers consumers' costs, and creates opportunities for businesses to access broader markets. By encouraging international collaboration and reducing economic isolation, free trade can really enhance diplomatic relationships and contribute to global economic stability.
That makes sense. How does free trade directly benefit consumers and national economies?
So free trade benefits consumers by providing access to a wider variety of goods and services at lower prices. By eliminating tariffs and other trade barriers, free trade reduces the cost of imported goods, allowing customers to enjoy higher quality products for less money. It also promotes innovation and competition among producers, driving improvements in quality and efficiency. It also has an impact on national economies. It stimulates economic growth by opening up new markets for exports. And for developing countries, it attracts foreign investment. This can lead to job creation, increased productivity, and overall a stronger economy.
Yeah. Additionally, the free trade can help stabilize price and reduce inflationary pressures by ensuring a steady flow of goods across borders, right? Let's talk about the impact on domestic job markets, Jayden. Does free trade create opportunities or lead to job losses?
So free trade creates both opportunities and challenges in the job market. On one hand, sectors that have a comparative advantage, such as technology, pharmaceuticals, or agriculture in certain countries, tend to thrive in a free trade environment, driving economic growth and employment. On the other hand, free trade can lead to job losses in industries that struggle to compete with cheaper imports or more inefficient foreign producers. This can result in factory closures and displacement of workers in affected sectors, particularly in manufacturing or industries reliant on low-cost labor. The overall impact depends on how well economies adapt, including through policies that retrain displaced workers, promote education, and invest in sectors with high growth potential. A well-known example for job losses due to free trade is the decline of manufacturing jobs in the United States following the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, in 1994. So what NAFTA did was reduce trade barriers between the US, Canada, and Mexico, so all of the North American neighboring countries, and made it easier for companies, especially in industries like textiles, automotive, and electronics industries, to move operations abroad to remain competitive. This led to significant job losses in regions heavily reliant on manufacturing, such as the Midwest, often referred to as the Rust Belt. While NAFTA boosted trade and economic growth overall, the displaced workers in these sectors faces challenges like long-term unemployment and lower wages in new jobs.
So have you watched the Donald J. Trump inaugural address?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so he mentioned about the manufacturing,
Yeah.
right? So he said America will be manufacturing nation once again.
So he's trying to put a huge tariff plan over all the imports into the country. He has a base tariff of 10 to 20%. He's going to put 25% tariffs on goods coming in from Canada or Mexico. And he's going to have over 60% of tariffs coming in from China, which is, the US's main trade rival. And he's also going to try to implement a retaliatory tariff policy. So if China gets mad and imposes like a 200% tariff, then the US is going to retaliate back with an equal to 100% tariff.
Yeah.
So tariffs does not solve everything, and this concept of putting tariffs on each other goes back way into like World War II. So it's called the Chicken Wars, I think. And after World War II ended, German citizens started consuming a lot of chicken, and most of them were actually farmed in America. So all the European chicken farmers got mad and wanted protection. So the EU imposed a tariff on all the chicken imported from the US. And the US got mad and retaliated with a tariff on Volkswagen vans and trucks, right? So in the end, tariffs are for protecting local manufacturing jobs and protecting certain specific industries. But as the consumers, in the consumer's perspective, chicken prices went up in the EU, and then people had less truck options in the US, and the sales of Volkswagen trucks didn't really go up after they started imposing the tariffs. So ordinary consumers don't see as much as a good effect, rather, so it's more for protecting the industries and employment markets.
That's true. And he said, if you want to pay a lot of tariffs and taxes, you need to build a factory in the United States soil, and then I'm not gonna, impose you any tax. If you manufacture your products in the United States, right?
Yeah. So he did a very similar thing actually back in 2018, 2020 when he was in his first term. So washing machines, South Korean companies like LG produce very good washing machines. And Trump decided to put a heavy tariff on imported washing machines. So that did make LG build factories and create some jobs here in the US. But the consequence was washing machine prices started going up because they put a tariff on the imported products. And then all the local US companies also started raising their prices to match that because demand was going up for them. So in the end, washer prices went up, and then also dryer prices started going up as well because people buy washers and dryers a combination at the same time. So it actually costs consumers $1 billion more, and it only created a couple thousand jobs. So people were paying very, very large sums of money for each job. And ultimately, it did create jobs, but it wasn't the most efficient way to create jobs locally in the US. So economics is very complicated. There's a lot of chain reactions.
So one factor cannot change everything.
Yeah.
But okay. So, and how about the economic gap between developed and developing countries? Does free trade widen or bridge that gap?
This is also an issue with valid arguments on both sides. While free trade can help developing nations access global markets and attract investment, it can also entrench inequalities if wealthier nations dominate trade terms, right? So balancing this requires fair trade practices and capacity building initiatives. Free trade can really both narrow and widen the economic gap depending on how it's implemented or managed. So there's advanced technologies, foreign investments obviously flowing into the country, and that can simulate economic growth. However, free trade can also worsen the gap when developing nations struggle to compete with the advanced industries or more advanced countries. Without adequate infrastructure, education, or governance, you're not going to get that far.
Exactly. So that brings up another important point. Workers' right. How does free trade influence labor conditions?
This is another double-edged story. On one hand, it can encourage better labor practices due to global trade standards, but in some cases, competition can drive a race to the bottom where countries cut corners on workers' right to stay competitive. So international agreements must address this. So for example, NAFTA led to the rapid growth of factories in Mexico, where workers were often subjected to long hours, unsafe environments, and minimal pay. On the flip side, trade agreements that include labor provisions like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, so USMCA was the successor to NAFTA, and that encouraged higher standards by requiring participating countries to uphold labor rights. The USMCA did, however, have a stricter regulations than NAFTA. For example, in the automotive industry, NAFTA required only 65% of all components in a car to be made locally. But USMCA required that percentage to be 85%. So suddenly, a lot of car manufacturers had to resource all their parts locally, or their cars will get tariffed and taxed. So that was a significant disruption in the automotive industry as well.
Let's move on to the different topic, global politics and ethics. So geopolitical tensions often play a big role in trade agreements. How do these tensions impact free trades?
So geopolitical tensions can significantly impact the creation, implementation, and stability of free trade agreements. Such tensions often arise from conflicting national interests, security concerns, and ideological differences. For example, the US-China trade war illustrates how political rivalry can undermine free trade. So there's a lot of sanctions and tariffs going on. And especially right now, so electronics, the chip war is a very hot topic right now. So basically, China initially didn't have much technology to produce advanced semiconductors. So all of that happened in a strict circle. So the technology, the machines for producing those semiconductors were all the way in Europe. I believe it was Finland. And the blueprints and the actual assembly happened in countries like South Korea and Taiwan. So it was a very strict relationship with the U.S. and the U.S. funded all of those facilities. And then China actually hired various spies to actually steal the machines' data over in in the European countries, and then they brought it back to their country. And they started accelerating and investing really hard into their own chip manufacturing. So it's gotten a lot of attention. And the geopolitical fight over Taiwan is also, semiconductors have a big factor into that fight conflict, because Taiwan TSMC manufactures well over 90% of really high quality, high tech semiconductors. And if China can dominate and take over that market, then China has all of the components necessary from designing semiconductors to producing it all in their hand. So that's why the US is trying to fiercely protect Taiwan, while China is trying to take it and
keep exploiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you tell me about a little bit of the Brexit issue?
Yeah. The Brexit is basically the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. So until recently, like I had, what is England? What is UK? What is European Union? What is the British Isles? Like, so the European Union is currently a collection of 27 countries in the Europe area, but the United Kingdom is not part of that. So. And Brexit was their exit from the EU. And it was driven in part by political and sovereignty issues, which complicated trade relations and led to the renegotiation of trade terms. But on the other hand, you have something like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, where countries are aligned to counterbalance China's growing influence in the Asia-Pacific region. So geopolitics often shapes the trajectory of trade agreements as economic decisions become intertwined with like national security and diplomatic strategies. So all of these economic concepts and trade and politics are all swirled together.
Yeah.
And it's a very complicated system.
I know. When I was in uni, me and my seniors, we were studying about the FTA with the Korea, between Korea and United States. At that time, a lot of the people in agriculture business, they didn't want to import rice or the meat from US because of the the market price issue. So I remember that as well. Okay, what about the environmental concerns? How can we navigate environmental impacts of free trade?
Yeah, obviously you're trading across the oceans, you're using a lot of cargo ships and airplanes to transport that. And transportation is a significant portion of the world's total carbon emissions. So to mitigate the environmental impacts of free trade, several measures can be implemented, mostly focusing on sustainability and accountability. Strong environmental regulations in trade agreements is very crucial. These can set enforceable standards for pollutions and obviously efficient resource management. The USMCA includes commitments to combat illegal logging and protect marine environments. Governments and international bodies can also promote green technologies and industries through subsidies and incentives, investments, ensuring that economic growth aligns with environmental sustainability. There's also carbon border taxes like the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, and they can hold countries accountable for carbon emissions associated with exporting goods. Yeah, and the final thing is that countries can be transparent about their carbon emission through reports and fact-checking each other's claims about. Yeah.
I know that there is a certain mandatory regulation that you need to report the carbon emission the percentage every year. Yeah, that might be the one.
But unfortunately, the U.S. is trying to steer in the opposite direction right now.
Oh.
Yeah, they pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which is a very global agreement to combat climate change. And President Trump is trying to foster oil industries, grow the oil more, use all of the natural resources that they can, which may be good for their economy, but it's very not a good direction for the environment.
Yeah, and then he also canceled. He just signed the executive order that cancel the mandatory electric vehicle purchases.
Oh yeah. So no more mandatory vehicles. There's no financial incentives now in purchasing an electric vehicle. He wants people to choose which type of vehicle that they want to ride in.
Yeah. And then he said let's drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
And he's gonna say, he was saying like, we're gonna use our own resources
Liquid
like
gold.
oil, gas, and then we're gonna use it. Like we're gonna use it.
Yeah.
He said that. Okay. Can you share an example of successful or controversial free trade agreement like a NAFTA or EU single market?
Yeah, so I did mention NAFTA earlier, so let's talk about the European Union single market. It's cited as both a successful and controversial free trade framework. It was established in 1993, and it allows for the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people across member states, significantly boosting economic integration. So the single market has been highly successful in increasing trade volume, fostering various types of innovation, and creating jobs within the EU. For example, it helped small and medium-sized enterprises access a larger market and reduced costs for consumers through competition. However, it's also been controversial. Critics argue that uniform regulations required by the single market sometimes undermine national control over domestic policies. Brexit is also a prominent example of these tensions, while many people expressing concerns about the perceived loss of sovereignty and the challenges of unrestricted migration. So while the single market has driven economic growth and integration, its success is also accompanied by debates about balancing economic benefits with political autonomy and national interests.
So, Jayden, you mentioned about the Brexit and the U.S.-China trade war earlier. What can we learn? What can we learn from this? What about the lesson?
Yeah, so I think Brexit and also the tensions between the U.S. and China offers quite a few lessons about how trade and politics influence each other. A major takeaway is that free trade agreements must consider not just economic gains, but also the political and social concerns of the populations involved. Brexit highlighted how perceived threats to sovereignty, identity, and border control can outweigh the economic benefits of trade integration. From the US-China trade war, a key lesson is the fragility of global supply chains in the face of geopolitical conflicts. Huawei, which was thriving a couple of years ago, now got heavily sanctioned by the US, and its company drastically reduced its size and market to just like people in China. So both examples show that economic independence does not guarantee political stability.
Okay, so let's talk about the future outlook. Looking ahead, what do you think is the future of free trade in the global economy?
Yeah, the future of free trade in the global economy is likely to be shaped by, again, a delicate balance between liberalization and regulation. As globalization continues, free trade will remain a cornerstone of economic growth. However, the growing emphasis on sustainability, labor rights, and national security will likely lead to trade agreements that include more stringent provisions. So regional trade blocs like the EU and CPTPP are expected to gain prominence as nations seek strategic alliances to mitigate geopolitical risks. Another example of this is BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, China. So that's another group. They're trying to create their own currency, and obviously they'll be having their own trade laws within that group. So trade and geopolitics will have a very strong intertwined influence on each other. Challenges such as climate change, protectionism, and supply chain vulnerabilities may slow the pace of traditional free trade expansion. As tensions become more complex, there's not going to be many cases where, I'll just let these countries trade each other without limitations, right? Still, these pressures could encourage more innovative approaches like green trade policies and localized production networks. In this evolving landscape, free trade's success will hinge on collaboration and adaptability to address the interconnected realities of the global economy.
Well said, Jayden. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. To our listeners, we hope today's discussion inspire you to think more deeply about how interconnected our world truly is. So free trade isn't just about economics. It's about creating opportunities, fostering cooperation, and finding ways to balance progress with fairness. So let's remember that every decision we make as consumers and citizens shapes the future of trades and our planet. Stay curious, stay informed, and let's work towards a more equitable world. Jayden, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me and shedding lights on the complexity of free trades.
Oh yeah, always a pleasure, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so wherever you listen from Spotify or YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to Current Density with Jayden and share your thoughts with us. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Bye.
Bye.